Daily Tech News Show is made possible by its listeners thanks to all of you, including Paul Boyer, Kevin Morgan, Paul Thiessen, and new patrons Peter, Alex, and Chris.
Woo! Peter, Alex, Chris.
Pack. On this episode of DTNS, X allows blocked users to see posts those of who've blocked them. Jim explains why it nicks CarPlay and Android Auto in EVs. And Tim Stevens is here to allay our fears about the flammability of EV batteries. This is the Daily Tech News for Monday, November 4th, 2024. From Columbus, Ohio, I'm Robb Dunewood.
From upstate New York, I'm Tim Stevens.
And I'm the show's producer, Roger Chang.
Tim Stevens, it is good to see you. I know we've got a bunch to talk about that I cannot wait because I got some questions and I got some concerns.
Awesome.
Before we get to our deeper conversations, why don't we jump into the quick hits? Disney has created the official Office of Technology Enablement, or OTE, a new strategic group to oversee AI and mixed reality adoption in a responsible way across the company. The team will be led by Jamie Voris, previously CTO of Walt Disney Studios, who will report to Disney Entertainment co-chairman Alan Bergman, who announced the creation of the group in an internal memo Friday. The OTE is intended to ensure Disney is a progressive, innovative, and responsible leader in AI and mixed reality, and is aimed at positioning Disney to be at the forefront of formulating industry best practices.
The image editing platform Pixelmator announced Friday that it is being acquired by Apple. There will be no changes to Pixelmator Pro, Pixelmator for iOS, or the Photomator apps at this time, but if Apple's acquisition history is any indication, that level of autonomy could change soon as Pixelmator's features are integrated directly into the Photos app. Pixelmator has been around since 2007 when it was founded in Lithuania, and the deal with Apple must still receive regulatory approval.
Samsung has released a November 2024 security update for the Galaxy Tab S7 FE and carrier-locked Galaxy S24, S24 Plus, and S24 Ultra models in the U.S. This update, version S9 2X US QS4 AXJA, addresses multiple security vulnerabilities, but doesn't introduce any new features or performance improvements.
That was impressive, Rob. You got through that whole thing without missing a character. According to analyst Ming-Chi Kuo, Apple has encountered challenges in developing lower-cost version of its Vision Pro headset without compromising key features. As a result, the release of this more affordable model has been postponed, possibly until after 2027. Consequently, Apple's only anticipated head-mounted display for 2025 is the $3,500 Vision Pro, which could feature an upgraded M5 processor.
The New York Times Tech Guild, representing around 700 technical staff members, has gone on strike beginning Monday. It's today. The Guild's demands include enhanced job security, equitable pay, and a flexible work option. Times management has offered a 2.5% annual wage increase, a minimum 5% pay increase for promotions, and a $1,000 ratification bonus. The company also plans to maintain its current 2 days per week in office work requirements through June 2025, with 3 weeks of remote work allowed annually. So let's get into some of these bigger tech stories we're going to talk about, starting with the social media platform X is rolling out its controversial update to the block feature, which will now allow users you've blocked to see your public posts. Block users can still can't follow the person who's blocked them, engage with their posts, or send direct messages to them. They can, however, now see the following and follows list of people who have blocked them. X said the logic behind the change was that the block feature can be used to share and hide harmful and private information about someone, and its new iteration would result in more transparency. Tim, where do you fall on this block feature? You think this is a good idea, or just what are your thoughts? I don't want to put words into your mouth.
On first glance, it almost seems like a reasonable change because it is so easy to get around a block that you can almost say, well, it kind of makes sense that they're basically making this more transparent. But, you only have to think about it for a few seconds to realize that that's not really what's really happening here. I'm very much with Tracy Chow on X, who said that basically, why would you make it easier for someone to get around a block? What they're basically making it so that you no longer have to go into an incognito tab, or you no longer need to log out in order to see someone's content that's blocked you. And so if you are someone who's stealing someone else's content, if you're someone who's harassing someone, it's just so much easier now for you to copy and paste their stuff and post it yourself, or to take a screen grab and repost it if you want to harass them. And I don't know why you would make it easier. Why would you make this change without proposing a change that makes it easier, makes it more secure? That just doesn't make sense for me. The conspiratorial theorist in me just feels like this is maybe a way for X to boost their metrics, which must be declining right now. Certainly, this is going to make a lot more posts more visible than they would be otherwise.
Yeah, I understand the words that they're saying that they're using when they say, well, this is why we're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't make any sense. If you have a big, giant social media platform that has hundreds of millions of people on it, and there's a few that you just don't rock with, and it's like, I don't want to deal with you at all, and I block you, I don't want it to be easy for you to continue to do the stuff that you've been doing. I understand that. Well, I could just go in incognito mode, create a new account, and I can go and I can at least see who you are and see what you're posting. I get that, but it should never be easier to not be creepy. In this case, that's kind of, I believe that's what Tracy Chow said.
Yeah,
so
exactly. Yep.
yeah, so it's really interesting to me to where they've done this. I almost wonder, putting my conspiracy hat on, is this just something that, what can I do to get under a certain segment of my user skin? I know I'm being really facetious when I say that, but not really. It's like, I almost wonder, are you doing this just to irk people that are going to be bothered by it? Because people are going to go to factions. One group is going to be absolutely for this. Another group is going to be absolutely against it. And as you said, Tim, it may just make more content people are going to be talking about, which ultimately will drive up numbers for X.
And certainly there's someone on X who is probably more blocked than anybody else on X, and that person in particular would want to have more engagement on their posts, and that person would be the one who can absolutely make this change go through. So there's a lot of reasons to be skeptical about the reasoning behind this, and so it's pretty hard these days, I think, to not look at all these changes in a skeptical light. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That is at least the public perception. X obviously doesn't care what public perception is at this point. They're having to make these changes regardless. But at the end of the day, we're talking about a legitimate safety issue for people, and for creators, a particularly strong issue when it comes to their content being copied. And to make a change like this that makes it easier for people to copy work or to harass, again, without implementing anything else that is a roadblock or at least a speed bump, is really unfortunate.
Now, there may be some questions that the X will have to answer because Apple's App Store says that apps with user generation content must have the ability to block abusive users from the service. Google has something similar with interaction with specific users. For example, direct messaging, tagging, mentioning, etc., must provide an in-app functionality for blocking users. So I wonder if this is going to meet their definition of blocking. Clearly, you can still block. And as the article says, when you block someone, they cannot interact with you. They cannot DM you. They can't comment on your post. They can't do those kind of things, but they can still see them. Does that meet the criteria for what Google and Apple say are blocks as far as their ecosystems, their stores are concerned? I think that is a discussion maybe for another day.
Yeah, for sure. If anything, I would love to see Apple and Google update those terms to be a little bit more specific and a little bit more strict, and then force the hand of social media networks like this to do better, and that would be a great thing.
Yeah, so like I said, for me personally, I am not a big user of X any longer. It has been it's probably been like a 2-year thing where I've gotten off to where the point now I still keep myself on there. I still have an account in case anyone wants to DM me, just because I've been on X for so long, before X Twitter for so long, and I wouldn't want to have people who only can contact me that way not be able to. But it's pretty rare personally that I don't even check it any longer. It's only if I get a notification that I have a DM that I even go back and look at the platform. So maybe this will create more people, and maybe it'll bring people like me back in. I don't know if that's the case for me personally, but we soon will see.
Yeah, I'm in pretty much the same boat myself. I've more or less moved most of my interactions to Blue Sky, to Threads, to even Mastodon. I see a lot of engagement on there as well. So that's kind of where I'm doing my social media stuff these days. But honestly, in general, I'm just doing a lot less of that overall than I used to. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
So moving from social media now, let's move into driving vehicles, because I've been waiting to have this conversation with you. In an interview with The Verge's Nilay Patel, Barris Sentenac, GM Senior VP Software and Services, Product Management, Program Management, and Design, it's a long one, explained the car company's recent decision to drop Apple CarPlay and Android Auto from GM's future EVs. The need to create a unified UX and accommodate things as disparate as audio playback to monitoring a trailer your truck is pulling lends itself to vertically integrating the hardware and software in-house and offer a unified experience, but still tailored to the vehicle. Barris encourages partners like Apple, Google, Amazon, and Spotify to share some pieces of information that can be accessed outside their walled garden to allow for the same experience from vehicle to vehicle. So, Tim, like I said, I've been waiting to talk to you about this. Is this a good thing? Is this a good thing for GM to be doing this on their EVs? Because I think it does make sense in some ways, but I know that there's going to be a lot of folks who are really into CarPlay or who are really into Android Auto that are going to be real miffed that they can't use the system they've been using for the last 10, 12 years.
Yeah, for sure. The vast majority of people that I talk to will not buy a car if it does not support either Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, depending upon which smartphone platform they've chosen. And so for that reason alone, I have a hard time thinking that this is really a good move for GM, especially as they're really struggling to get momentum behind their EV sales. They've had so many issues, recalls, delays, and then to further put another roadblock up ahead of adoption for these cars that are really important to the future of the business. Seems short-sighted to me, especially when it is so easy for them to do whatever they want to do on the software front while also offering smartphone projection. It's such a trivial thing to implement in a car these days that it's really just kind of an ethical, religious almost choice that they've decided to make. They've decided to draw the line in the sand, and they're not going to cross it. The reasoning that he lists here is pretty standard, the same stuff that we've been hearing from years from other people like Tesla, like Rivian, basically that they want to control the experience. Of course, that makes sense. The dashboard it's really the part of the car that you see the most if you're driving your car. And so they want to make sure that you're providing a clean, seamless, cohesive experience. But for decades now, manufacturers have proven that they're not really very good at doing that. And so smartphone projection, that's why that exists. And in general, people are a lot happier using CarPlay or Android Auto than the vast majority of the in-car interfaces. I think the kind of funny thing about this is the GM's solution is Android. Basically, it is an Android interface, and it looks a lot like you're using any old Android tablet. It is very thinly skinned, and you can pretty quickly and easily see the Google going on behind there. So for them to say that Android Automotive or Android Auto, is not okay, but Android Automotive is okay, is a bit curious. But really, the other side of this that I thought was really optimistic was, as you said, Barris really hoping that they can open doors to more information being shared from apps. So, for example, your podcast preferences, that kind of thing would be able to be shared with the car instead of just living within your podcast app. But we've been dealing with the App Store for 15 years, and of course, application development has been going on for a lot longer than that. And I still have apps that don't support night mode, for example. But he's optimistically thinking that GM can force all these app manufacturers to share all their metadata with them in the car, which I think is unfortunately just very optimistic. So it's a short-sighted decision. There's no reason for them to not offer both. If they can prove they can do better, great, then they can turn it off. But they have not yet proven that in my book.
Yeah, I remember back in the day, because I've only ever owned GM vehicles. My family, many of my family members worked for GM. So just the discounts that you could get and the fact that everybody that I knew had a GM car made getting a GM car easier. But I do remember that, even on the higher end luxury cars, it took forever for GM to introduce Bluetooth. And the reason that they didn't is because, well, we've got this OnStar, and we would rather, instead of you using your phone that you already pay for to make phone calls, we want you to use a completely separate phone number that you pay us for to make phone calls in a not optimal way. And they fought tooth and nail to not have Bluetooth in cars until so many people I just won't buy a car if I can't get Bluetooth in it, that they finally did. I believe that was like 2009 or 2010.
Yeah,
this kind of reminds me of that, to where the reason that CarPlay and Android Auto, the reason that they are so popular is because they're software companies that build software, and they iterate it and keep getting better and better and better and better with it. And US car companies, you put a car out and what you get is pretty much what you got. And it doesn't really get better. You don't update it. I know on EVs, that's maybe a little bit different, but that has been the history of the companies like GM that we've known. Is the software you get is the software that you have. I have CDs in cars with maps on them from 2009. because it's like, why would I want to upgrade that when I can just use my phone? So I understand the point that they're making, that if you want to have the best integration, we've got to do it. I don't disagree with that. I just wonder, is this the right application to do it with? I'm not so certain.
Yeah, I'm not either. It's also interesting to me to see different manufacturers taking different approaches to this. We see, a hardline stance on one side from Rivian, Tesla, and now GM as well. On the other side, we have manufacturers like Porsche who are actually opening things up even more for smartphone manufacturers. So for the next generation of CarPlay in next generation Porsches, CarPlay will actually be able to run in the gauge cluster. Even it'll have access to data from the car, so you can have things like speed readout information within Apple CarPlay and other features. You can control HVAC from within CarPlay. So instead of basically trying to pull the smartphone stuff into the dashboard, into the Porsche experience, they're basically pushing Porsche stuff into the Apple experience, which I think is a really interesting move in the opposite direction. And I think that's really embracing the things that people want out of their cars. Of course, if you're an Android user, that's not really going to help you too much. But it's a sign that manufacturers don't really know what people want, don't really know what the right way forward is. And I think my answer is it's software. You should give everybody everything that they want, and you shouldn't really just lock the door on anything because it's all code. You can do anything you want to with it.
If I had to play prognosticator and just be a betting person, I would bet that within a few years, GM's going to do what they do, but you're going to be able to plug your phone in and get that up. I'm struggling to see a world to where I can just foresee there being such a revolt from people who are completely happy with their cars, but they're not happy with their entertainment system. Like, if I can't get what I want, I'll just get something else, because cars pretty much do the same things. They go forwards, backwards, turn left and right. That's pretty much what cars do. So when you start getting into the software pieces of them, people might make a decision based off of, well, I like this software more, therefore I'm going to get that car. And GM does not want people deciding whether or not they get their car or not based off of software that their car runs. That's probably not a tenable position for them to be in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do you want to hear us talk about on the show? One way to let us know is in our subreddit. Submit stories and vote on them at www.reddit.com/r/Daily Tech News Show. So, Tim, we're going to keep talking about cars. In this story, we're going to talk about one of the more contentious aspects of EVs, are fire risk. Detractors on social media and YouTube make claims that EV battery technology makes fires more likely to happen and more difficult to put out. But is this really true? I want to know from you, because you recently wrote an article inside EVs titled, "Are EVs Really Fire Prone? Death Traps?" Can you walk us through and just kind of let us know, is this fear, uncertainty, and doubt, or should we be worried, or are we over exaggerating what the really is in this situation?
I think it's definitely something that people should be aware of, but ultimately I think it's important, as ever in these things, to look at the numbers and look at how realistic these things are. And of course, to be aware that there is so much hate for EVs right now, all of it irrational, that any little thing like this that happens is definitely going to be blown up. So at the end of the day, yes, EVs can catch fire. And the reason that happens is usually something that's called thermal runaway, which is basically where the battery, something happens in the battery, either it's overheating due to charging, or there's damage to the battery more likely that causes it to start gaining heat more quickly than it can discharge through the battery's cooling systems, which all modern EVs have these days. And so it just continues to gain heat until it combusts. And when an EV does catch fire, we've probably all seen footage of them. It's a pretty scary thing because it is a big fire. It can take a long time for those fires to extinguish. And if that happens to happen while your car is in the garage, for example, that can definitely cause damage to your home, if not cause it to burn down. That is a pretty scary thing. And again, because EVs are new and because there's a lot of people who have a vested interest against them, there's a lot of publicity whenever those fires do happen. But there's been a ton of research that's gone into EV fires, looking into how likely they are to happen, the intensity, the damage caused by them. And far and away, they are far less likely to catch fire than a typical gasoline-powered car. And because of that, they are simply far lower in risk. I'm going to read some numbers just because I want to make sure that I get them. There was a 2022 study in Sweden that showed basically fires from between 4.4 million fuel-burning cars versus 611,000 EVs in service. Did the math on all the fires in there and found that there was a 0.004% chance of a given EV catching fire, compared to a 0.08% of ICE cars. So that's basically an order of magnitude more common for a gasoline-powered car to catch fire than a battery-powered car. There was also one in in Norway that showed battery fires between 2006 and 2016, so a 10-year period. EV fires made up less than 5% of overall vehicle fires in Norway. So even if you correct for the number of EVs, which is a lot in Norway, remember they're about half of the overall driving population in Norway, it's a significantly lower chance of having a fire in an EV. And interestingly, that number actually dropped significantly over that period. Again, that was going from 2006 to 2016. So as EVs got more modern, as battery technology got better, the fire risk dropped substantially. And so modern EVs, which have active cooling and lots of other safety measures built into them to shut down any batteries that are damaged, are much less likely to catch fire. But they can catch fire. And certainly we saw some news coming out of the recent hurricanes in Florida, where a few cars that were submerged in salt water did catch fire. Interestingly, they were exclusively, they seem to be Teslas, in particular Tesla Model X's. But even if you look at the thousands and thousands of cars that were submerged during the flood, I think there was something like a dozen that did catch fire. So that is, again, pretty worrying. But out of the huge number of cars that were damaged during those hurricanes, the numbers are overall very low. And I think the most important thing to remember is that we all know that gasoline is explosive. We all know it's very flammable, but it's just something that we kind of treat as kind of a day-to-day occurrence. There was a massive tanker explosion in Nigeria I think just a week ago that killed 150 people. That kind of thing happens quite regularly where gasoline burns, gasoline explodes. But because it's something that is something that we've all seen and heard before, it doesn't really even tend to make the news, because it's just a standard thing. But again, because EVs are new, because people are curious about them, any EV fire turns out to be a big story, basically. And so, again, EVs can catch fire. It is a realistic thing, but it's much less likely than you would think based on the kind of coverage that we're seeing.
Now, I think maybe one of the things that could go to making people fearful of this is that the fires that you see for EVs, they look bad. They look
do.
bad. So
they're very hard to put out. And that's, I think, part of what needs to change in the response to these things. If you get in a big crash, or if you see a big crash on the side of the road, you would just expect that your local emergency responders would have something called a jaws of life, which can cut the car open. Back in the 80s, that was a rare thing. But when those became when those were invented, they very quickly spread across basically the country, so that just about everybody has them. But right now, most fire departments don't have any specialty equipment for dealing with EV fires. There is new technologies and new equipment that can basically inject water directly into the battery pack to stop those EV fires much more quickly. But because, again, these are new, because EV adoption is low right now, a lot of departments don't have that yet. So I think if we can, get some momentum behind EVs, encourage our local emergency responders to have that equipment, that we could ultimately reduce these fires pretty substantially. But as it is right now, the only solution to an EV fire is to dump a whole lot of water on it for a long time until it finally burns itself out.
So we try to make these shows as personal as possible. So I've got just a personal question. I have a great uncle, 87 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And he has made the declaration, you'll never catch him in an EV, because in 1968, he had a battery on a tractor that caught fire and it damaged his tractor. So in his mind, batteries in cars, even though every car he has owned since then, and every car he will own from, that he will ever own from now until he no longer owns cars,
Mm-hmm.
will have some type of battery in it. Are EVs safe? That is the question. Are they as safe as cars that have 25 to 30 gallons of combustible, most flammable stuff that we've ever seen?
Yeah, they're absolutely safe, and they're absolutely more safe. Certainly, the battery that caught fire on him would have been a lead acid battery. It was just basically, a pile of lead submerged in acid. If that thing starts to overheat, if that thing catches fire, there's nothing in there to stop that from continuing. In a modern EV, each cell within a battery pack is thermally managed, is thermally monitored. Again, they all have active cooling systems that can ramp up if the battery starts to overheat. If they detect an issue, they can shut the battery down and disable the car before it does catch fire. So it really takes a pretty traumatic event to cause an EV to catch fire. So he has far more safety measures in an EV when it comes to fire retardants than he does in a traditional car. So if anything, if he's worried about fire, I'd say he's much safer in an EV than in a traditional gasoline powered car for sure.
Okay, I want to tell him, Tim said you're safe. So, or Tim said you're at least as safe as you would be in a car with an engine that also has a battery.
The numbers don't lie for sure. He's much safer.
Yeah. So, folks, we're going to go over to the mailbag. If you'd like to ever send us a message, you can do so by sending a message to feedback@dailytechnewsshow.com. The first one we're going to get to is from Russell, who had some thoughts on our conversation last Thursday with Justin Robert Young about what's happening at Amazon and going back to work. Russell says one reason that companies may be calling people back to the office is that when they built the offices in some locations, they got a significant tax incentive. Some of those assumptions around these incentives were that the companies were going to bring a certain size population of employees into the community on a daily basis, which would fuel growth for other local businesses in the area. If the people are not there, this is diminished. Specifically with Amazon, it could be a parity issue. They have a larger employee base in warehouses and working in distribution centers that cannot work from home. So they may be trying to create a bit of balance there. It's actually some good points.
That is, yeah. I've certainly heard people saying, that people are doing RTO stuff to basically as a way of doing layoffs without having to officially do layoffs. But this is an interesting angle that I hadn't heard before, and it makes a lot of sense. It is still depressing, but it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, a lot of these really big companies have, buildings downtown that seat thousands of people, and if they're no longer there, that absolutely could affect those downtown areas.
Makes sense.
So we have another email from Jason who posted about Friday's discussion and upgrading to Windows 11. He writes, in regards to upgrading to Windows 11, one thing that wasn't mentioned on the show was that the use of Secure Boot requires switching to UEFI in the BIOS, which also requires your boot drive to be in GPT format instead of MBR format. Doing that conversion is the last step he's on. So when it comes to upgrading his PCs. So we want to say thank you to Russell and thank you to Jason for those emails, and also to you, Tim, for being on the show. Where can folks reach out and see more about what you've got going on?
Yeah, thanks, Rob, for having me. I think the best place to keep in touch with what I'm up to is at my Substack, which is timstevens.substack.com. And we're continuing to do a lot of EV myth busting on Inside EV. So that's kind of an ongoing series of all the anti-EV stuff that we're seeing. So check that out as well.
Data scientist and guest Andrea Joins Roy has a new show called Behind the Data. The pilot launched during Experiment Week and is now a standalone show. In episode 3 of the show, it looks at data on how TV and movies affect us. Get the show at behindthedatashow.com. Patrons, stick around for the extended show Good Day Internet. Meta has shared new details about its proprietary age verification software. We'll discuss it. You can also catch the show live Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern, 2000 UTC. Find out more at dailytechnewsshow.com/live. We'll be back tomorrow with Sarah and I. See you tomorrow, folks.
The DTNS family of podcasts, helping each other understand.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.